Association of Maine by day, but I'm also one of the board members of the Maine Society of Association Executives, which is the organizer of this event. MSAE exists for association and chamber execs like myself, membership-based organizations. We do best practices, association law, other events during the year. And so earlier this summer, the board got together and said, look, there's some interesting referendum questions on the ballot this year. Wouldn't it be great if we put together an event that talked about both sides of the issue, that's not taking a side one way or the other, that's looking to just provide some information to folks before we really get into the campaign season. As you all know, as soon as Labor Day comes and goes, that's when real campaigns really start, and that's when people will really start paying attention. But for those of us that run membership organizations, we want to make sure we're providing information to our members, and that was the genesis of this event. And so we tried to do something different. We said, look, we know that folks that are on either side of these issues could probably talk very eloquently for 90 minutes or 2 hours on any of the issues. But ultimately, the time you're going to have in front of the people in Maine for voting on them is going to boil down to some talking points and some bumper stickers. And so what we wanted to do was provide an opportunity to give both sides in a somewhat concentrated format. What we talked about was kind of speed dating for legislative issues. It would be rapid fire types of things, and that we'd also mix it up, that we're not going to take these 5 questions, question 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 in order. We're going to do it randomly. We're going to draw from those bowls at the front to draw which question we're going to do first. And we're not necessarily going to do the pro side first and the con side. We're going to draw those also. So perhaps the con side is going to go first on a question, or perhaps the pro side is going to go first on a question. Each speaker is going to get 10 minutes to present their case. This is not a debate. This is a forum to provide information. We ask people, please try to act with respect. We have 5 questions, so each question is going to be 20 minutes. That's going to take about an hour and 40 minutes, so there may be time for Q&A at the end. We'll see how we're doing at that time, because at 5 o'clock, we're also going to have a social hour, where you're welcome to engage one-on-one with any of the presenters, ask some questions if there's not time for questions at the end, continue to have that conversation. All the presenters were given the opportunity to provide handouts as well, so you can take those with you for additional information. So what we'll do is when we draw the questions, we'll ask the 2 presenters to come up and sit up over here to my right. The presenters can either speak from the podium, take the handout, and walk around the room. Some have PowerPoints, and we'll have those up for you as well. And we also have the actual wording of the 5 questions that we'll show at the beginning of each. So without any further ado, we'll get underway, and we'll choose the first question and then the first pro and con. I'm going to choose somebody who I don't know. And if you would just choose one of those. Which question is it?
Question 3.
Question 3. So question 3 is going to go first. And let's see, who else do I know? I do know all the people in the room. That's not good.
Not related.
Yeah. I do know you, but only just. What side goes first? The no. So the con side is going to go first on question 3. So the 2 presenters, question 3 would please come up. Come on up over here. And your counterpart. Hold that back up. So, question 3 is the one on background checks. So you have a little timer here that's 10 minutes as well. So it'll go yellow and then red when you're out of time. If you're in the middle of a sentence, certainly feel free to finish that sentence, but we're going to ask you to stop at 10 minutes and then Bobby Reynolds. So our 2 presenters are David Trahan from the Sportsman Alliance of Maine and Bobby Reynolds from Main Street Solutions, who's representing the pro side as well. So since the con side got to go first, Mr. Trahan, the floor is yours.
Well, good news. I've timed my presentation at 9 minutes and 30 seconds, so I should be able to do this on time. Do justice. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, folks, for inviting us to this event so we'd have an opportunity to speak to this issue. This November's referendum ballot question 3 is touted as an effort to expand mandatory background checks to nearly all private firearm sales. In reality, it is not. Instead, question 3 was written to be politically attractive, but is intentionally complex and goes beyond overkill to include provisions that no one can follow. Question 3 would take simple, harmless acts, like loaning a firearm to a friend for self-protection, target shooting, or hunting, and create a bureaucratic nightmare. It creates thousands of new ways in which firearm owners can be entrapped by law enforcement, and it forces every law-abiding gun owner to look over their shoulder and wonder whether having an undocumented firearm in the woods and fields of Maine will lead to being charged with crimes that could land them in jail for up to 5 years and charged with a felony, which would, among other things, cost them their constitutional right to own firearms for the rest of their life. Under the proposed initiative language, lawyers working for ex-mayor Michael Bloomberg have redefined transfers to mean to sell, furnish, give, lend, or otherwise provide with or without consideration a firearm. This wording was pulled from a current Maine statute dealing with transfers of firearms to minors. It was never intended to deal with the NICS background check system. This potential massive new expansion of the use of the federal FBI NICS system extends the mandatory NICS background check beyond selling a firearm by adding lend or otherwise provide. This includes temporary transfers where possession but not ownership of the firearm changes. In addition, the proposed question 3 law states, a firearm dealer who agrees to facilitate a sale or transfer under this section shall process the sale or transfer as though selling or transferring the firearm from his own inventory. For every firearm owner, this means nearly every imaginable situation in which they have traditionally shared firearms, like loaning a friend a gun to hunt, target practice, or use for self-protection, is now subject to a NICS background check, enforcement, and potentially associated fines. If this law passes, loaning a firearm to your friend would look like this. First, the two of you have to meet at a licensed firearm dealer. The dealer takes the firearm, calls the FBI NICS hotline, and conducts the background check on your friend. If he passes, the FFL dealer takes the firearm into his inventory for a fee, estimated between $30 and $50. Seems simple, except that for all legal purposes, your friend appears to be the owner of record, or at least the last possession of the firearm. As the owner of the firearm, you should have a formal notarized agreement at some additional cost. We aren't done. In order to get your gun back, another transfer, you have to do the same thing in reverse. This time you undergo the NICS check and pay another $30 to $50. Question 3 is extremely dangerous to our outdoor hunting and recreational shooting culture and our constitutional right to own firearms. Unlike New York City, where concrete and pavement make up the woods, we live in the most heavily wooded and rural state in the country. For generations, family friends have passed along the traditions of hunting and safe use. Guides routinely allow clients traveling to Maine to borrow firearms when they hunt. It is common for sportsmen and women at camp to mentor young new hunters and share firearms. The fastest growing category of new hunters are women, and on most occasions, the young ladies are mentored using borrowed firearms. Not borrowed for one day, as this initiative reflects, but for weeks, sometimes a month. If this initiative passes, it will destroy that amazing network of responsible firearm ownership and use built by generations of law-abiding Mainers. There are exemptions to the background check requirement in question 3, but when it is understood how these are designed, it is clear they are not true exemptions, but tools of entrapment and harassment. There is an exemption for self-defense, but with this unreasonable condition. The transfer must be temporary and is necessary to prevent imminent death or great bodily harm. And the transfer lasts only as long as necessary to prevent such threat. This means, for example, if a disgruntled ex-boyfriend is chasing his ex-girlfriend through a parking lot with a hatchet, you may be able to loan the woman a gun to defend herself. But when the threat is gone, the gun must be returned immediately, and you cannot loan her the gun for self-defense just because her ex-boyfriend has previously threatened to kill her. Under this exemption, it is only allowed after the attack has begun. In addition, the exemption is only allowed after the attack, and there's not a provision to allow the return of the gun. Do you want to help sight in a friend's new gun at a range or borrow it to recreationally target shoot on private property? You'll need to review this exemption. A transfer or temporary loan without going through the background check process is only exempted while at an established shooting range, authorized by the governing body of the jurisdiction in which such a range is located, or, if no such authorization is required, operated consistently with local law in such jurisdiction. Sound like a lawyer talk there, but if this law passes and you're using your friend's gun at a shooting range, you have to have borrowed it while at the range, and you better know where the range is established and properly authorized by the appropriate governing body. If no such authorization applies, that the range is being operated or required by local laws, there is no similar exemption or transfers during recreational shooting on private property that is not an established range, authorized by local government, or operated in accordance with local law. Question 3's hunting and trapping exemption is only for when the actual transfer and transferee's entire possession of the loaned gun take place exclusively while hunting or trapping, and if the hunting or trapping activity is legal in all places where the transferee possesses the firearm. This is important. There are thousands of different situations where these stipulations may cause a problem. Besides the illegality of carrying the borrowed gun through buffer zones like those around homes and outbuildings, which is 100 yards, there's the illegality of carrying the gun out of the woods after legal hunting hours, or across land posted against hunting, but otherwise accessible to hunters. Anyone who fails to comply with the narrow and exact requirements of these limited exemptions runs the risk of potentially being charged with a Class D crime. For the first offense, punishable by a fine of up to $2,000 and just under a year in jail. A second offense is a Class C felony, punishable by up to 5 years imprisonment and a $5,000 fine. This for an offense of simply handing a gun to another person who is not otherwise prohibited from firearm possession. The definition of criminal offense is an act harmful not only to some individual or individuals, but also to a community, society, or the state. What harm is done to society by a hunter walking back to a vehicle with an unloaded, borrowed firearm 1 minute after legal hunting time? Because a background check is necessary before sales, loans, temporary lending, or otherwise providing a firearm in all but the exempted transfers, and because the exemptions are based on complex requirements, the initiative creates thousands of different ways in which a person can inadvertently violate the law. I am perplexed as to how proponents of question 3 can continue to argue that banning the ability to loan a legally owned firearm to a fellow hunter, a friend, in fear of their life, or to a target shoot on a weekend somehow improves public safety. Do we have a rash of violence and crime that is somehow linked to loaning a gun, or is this just another effort to micromanage the lives of American gun owners in the name of safety? As outlined here, the exemptions will cause more problems than they solve, and it's unlikely this initiative will change the ways in which criminals get their guns. Most criminals, 4 out of 5, acquire their guns illegally through the black market. Fellow gang members, theft, or straw purchases that already violate federal law. Question 3 is not about expanding background checks to private sales, as it implies, but to all transfers in which possession of a gun changes. It is about discouraging the private ownership and use of firearms, even by law-abiding citizens. Ethics Commission disclosure reports for the Yes on 3 campaign read like the who's who of Maine politically connected strategists, consultants, and political operatives, all on the Bloomberg payroll. My question for them is, did any of you actually read the initiative? Thank you.
Thank you, David. And now, Bobby Reynolds from Main Street Solutions.
Thank you, Curtis. Thank you to the Maine Society of Association Executives for hosting this forum. Appreciate it. I know we've got a lot of speakers, a lot of information coming at you folks, so I'll be brief, or as Henry VIII said to all his wives, I won't keep you long. Laugh track. No, Henry VIII is the guy who didn't keep his wife up. My name's Bobby Reynolds. I live in Manchester, Maine. I'm a veteran. I'm a retired professional firefighter. I'm a gun owner who grew up in a family of gun owners. I'm a sportsman who traps and hunts. I'm a Republican and an avid, ardent defender of the Second Amendment. I'm also Deputy Campaign Manager for Mainers for Responsible Gun Ownership, a coalition of Mainers including gun violence survivors, law enforcement officials, domestic violence prevention advocates, sporting families, non-sporting families, virtually Mainers all over this state. Our sponsors of this referendum include the Chief of Police of Bucksport and Wayne and Judy Richardson of South Portland, whose daughter Darian was a fatality as a result of gun violence a few years ago. When we went out to collect signatures, we had great success. We were able to get 85,000 Mainers from one end of the state to the other to sign petitions. Virtually a Mainer from every county, every city, every town in the state. Since being placed on the ballot, we have enlisted the help of hundreds and hundreds of volunteers, Mainers all. Some of them are here with us today. They're looking good in their orange shirts. I like that. Thank you for coming out. They've been making phone calls, knocking on doors, and having individual discussions with Maine voters all across the state, advocating for a yes on 3 vote. Now, many of us have been involved in politics for a while, but this election cycle is a little different than some past. In fact, it's a little zany. We've got a non-traditional presidential election that we're looking at. We have 2 congressional races, 151 House races, 35 Senate races, 5 ballot initiatives, a bond initiative, and then all the local issues. I got to tell you, if we don't all collectively jump off a bridge by November 8th, it'll be a miracle. But there's good news when it comes to question 3. It's simple and straightforward. It asks Mainers if they wish to expand the current background check system used at gun shops to include all sales and transfers of firearms, with some clear exceptions that are laid out in the law for hunting companions, shooting sport partners, and transfers within extended families and families directly. Now, if you're a gun owner like me, you may be familiar with the current background check system that is used at gun shops around the state, places like LL Bean, the Kittery Trading Post. In fact, the Sportsman's Alliance of Maine does background checks, and the many gun shops around the state. In fact, there's more gun shops in Maine than there are post offices. The way it works is you go in, you're going to buy the gun, you fill out the form, the proprietor calls down to the instant criminal background check system. If one clears the check, the sale proceeds, you get the gun, you go home. If one is denied the sale or transfer of the firearm, it's for a good reason. It's because they're prohibited by federal law from possessing a firearm. It means they're a felon, they're profoundly mentally ill, or they're a domestic violence perpetrator. This system, in fact, has worked quite well in Maine since 1998. Nearly 6,000 of these bad guys, felons and people that slap women around, have been denied getting their hands on a firearm in a gun shop. The problem is there's a blind spot in the current law. Those same people can go out in the open market, find a gun online or the classifieds, and they're able to purchase that gun and possess that gun with no background check, no questions asked. Question 3 will close that blind spot. Now, opponents make all kinds of claims about what this will do, and that's not an unusual way to try to defeat a referendum. You say the sky is falling. But we can look at what has happened in the 18 states that currently have this system in place. None of the things that my esteemed opponent said will happen have happened. They can point to no example of it happening, not one. But we do know that good things happen. They also claim that it violates the Second Amendment. I got to tell you, if it violated the Second Amendment, I wouldn't be up here. I'm a gun owner. I grew up in a family of gunsmiths. I've been around guns since I've been this tall. I have a passel of guns at my home in Manchester that I use for varying purposes, including self-defense. But don't take my word about the constitutionality of background checks. You can take the Supreme Court's word. In a landmark ruling, the Heller case, the court ruled that presumptive laws presenting bad people, felons, the profoundly mentally ill, and domestic abusers from possessing firearms is in keeping with the Second Amendment, and the best way to do that is through background checks. And before you jump to the conclusion that some far left-wing justice wrote that opinion, let me tell you who wrote that opinion. Justice Antonin Scalia, possibly the most conservative, pro-Second Amendment justice in the history of the Supreme Court. So I'll take Scalia's word as far as the constitutionality of this program is concerned. Now, we heard all these things that they say will happen that have never happened in any other states. But we can look at the results in the 18 states that currently have this system in place. What we've seen when compared to states that do not have expanded background checks is a dramatic reduction in the percentage and the numbers of assaults with firearms. We've seen a dramatic reduction in the numbers of suicides with firearms. We've seen a dramatic reduction in the numbers of guns trafficked illegally across state lines. We've seen a significant reduction. They've cut in half the number of police officers killed in the line of duty with a handgun. And most importantly, for consideration here in Maine, states with expanded background checks have seen a 46% reduction in the number of women killed by their intimate partner. And you may have heard, in Maine, half the murders that take place are the result of domestic violence. That's why this initiative has the backing of the Maine Chiefs of Police and a strong coalition of law enforcement officers from all over the state, including law enforcement officers from rural parts of the state. Oxford County, Lincoln County, Saginaw County, Aroostook County, the city of Bath, the town of Old Town, the city of Caribou. Law enforcement officers support this initiative because they work where the rubber meets the road. They know this initiative will save women's lives. Now, I'm a good guy. Some of you know me, you might not agree, but I'm a good guy. I don't mind going through background check. I've gone through them before, I'll go through them again. If I want to buy a gun, I'll go through a background check. If I want to loan a gun, I'll do a background check. If I want to leave my gun at a gunsmith to get work done, I'll go through a background check. Doesn't bother me because as a responsible gun owner, I've looked at the statistics. These things make a difference, and they do not violate anyone's Second Amendment right. If you can legally possess a gun, you haven't got a problem. Now, in closing, I'm going to give you an example why I think we need to vote yes on 3. Every spring, I look forward to the Maine Sportsman Show. It's fantastic. It's a way to shake off the winter doldrums and get rid of the cabin fever. And all I can think about as soon as the snow starts melting is turkey hunting. I go over to the Augusta Civic Center for the Sportsman Show, and without exception, every year, the best display is the Sportsman's Alliance of Maine. And it's the best display because they raffle off guns. And although I'm a good guy, I'm not a lucky guy. I buy tickets every time, but so far I haven't won. But I'm going to keep trying. But I'll tell you this. The person that does win, before they get their hands on that gun from the Sportsman's Alliance of Maine, they go through a background check. They go through a background check because Sam does not want to transfer a gun to a bad guy. But unfortunately, as it stands now, that bad person, if they fail that background check, can walk out into the parking lot of the Augusta Civic Center, get on their handheld device, and find a firearm within a stone's throw, and get that gun, no questions asked, no background check. Question 3 will close that loophole. In closing, I'll say this. You've heard the saying, the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. I think we add one more sentence to that. But we got to do everything we can to prevent that bad guy from getting the gun in the first place. And with that, I thank you for your time, and I ask you to vote yes on 3.
Thank you, Bobby. All right, 1 question down, 4 to go. Who's up again? Since the current question is already done, I'll ask you to choose the next question.
Question 4.
Question 4 will be up next. And you choose one of those. And it's the con side gets to go first. Yep, that one goes back in there. So, folks, for question 4. Is minimum wage. And today we have with us Greg Dougal of the Maine Restaurant Association, Maine Innkeepers Association, and Adam Lee, Chairman of Lee Auto Laws. So Greg, you're going to have the floor for 10 minutes. If I didn't specify before, you're seeing the lights up here. The green light is good. When it turns yellow, you have 2 minutes, and then red, your 10 minutes is up. These folks have some PowerPoints, I believe. So, all set?
I'm good.
All right.
Well, welcome everybody, and thank you very much for having us here today. My name is Greg Dougal, and I represent the Maine Innkeepers Association and the Maine Restaurant Association, and more importantly, I have been a member of the restaurant industry, the food service industry, for 20 years prior to actually doing this. So I saw how well Bobby did inspiring everybody. But I do want to make sure that I don't miss any of my notes, so I apologize if I have to look down at all for anything. But the one thing that I think that I'd like to say first is, as a group of industry professionals, we all feel strongly that the minimum wage needs to be increased. And I know that, potentially Mr. Lee or somebody else later on may say, well, yeah, it's just a smokescreen. But it isn't, it's anything but. And we did not sign on to any particular bill in the Labor Committee a couple of years back, because there were 7 bills. And everybody here, whether they're with me or against me, that does this for a living, knows you can never sign on to a bill till the end, because you never know what it's going to say. And interestingly enough, one of those bills is the exact same language as the referendum, and another one of those bills actually was $8, and we couldn't support that. But what happened to that bill was it became $8, $8.50, $9, $9.50. That was the final bill that was put forth, which we could have supported, but who the heck would have known what that is? So to say that we're not interested in an increase is disingenuous, because we have been promoting, we promoted a compromise at that point. We also promoted to have an increase this year. Sorry. So should hold on to this. Do I get minutes back, Curtis? Maybe turn it off. Anyway, so all you're going to do is see some numbers anyway, initially, and we'll get them back up here. So the numbers are the increases that restaurants will incur if this were to pass. And there's no denying that increases will occur. Whether or not we believe that they're sustainable or they are something that can be done is a different issue. But there are going to be costs associated with this. So on the minimum wage, the regular minimum wage side, there's going to be a portion of this that we don't pay minimum wage in most cases. So there's going to be a portion of this is going to be an increase, because people who don't make $12 are going to need to make $12, and people who make $12 are going to have to make more. So there's legitimately an increase of approximately about 60%. On the tipped wage side, that increase goes to 260%. So we're talking about something like 15% per year on the regular wage side, and then somewhere in the 30% range moving forward from there on the tip side. So pick a number, 22%, somewhere in the middle. That's the increase. Having worked in the industry, the margins in our industry are very small. 3 to 5% in the food service industry is a very big margin. That's about $22,000 a year. So in the first year, if this thing costs $30,000 to a restaurant, average size restaurant, main gross sales $750,000 to $1 million, you can tell in the first year the bottom line disappears. So what happens at that point? I mean, do menu prices get increased? What is going to happen to offset that? Because it needs to be offset. And it's going to continue for 4 years at that 30% level until $12 is achieved. And then, of course, the tipped wage is going to continue to increase as well for another 4 years, which will result in additional costs. So something is going to have to give. And thank you, Curtis, for saving me, and thanks for moving the slides forward. The other side of the coin here is, how is the tipped employee going to be treated in this whole process? There are many places, as everyone has been reading, where tipping has been eliminated, and that could be a result of this as well. There are places where people could potentially tip less. We've talked to some people in groups that say that if the minimum wage were similar to what they make per hour, that they probably aren't going to leave any money for the wait staff, or very little at that. So there is an opportunity here to make good money in our industry. Maybe not everyone does, but most people do. We have proof of that. It's on the state website and testimony with payroll records. People are making good money, and I think to some degree this thing is actually going to jeopardize it. So. It's obviously not just Maine's independent restaurants that will be hurt. The people that supply them will be hurt as well. The biggest reason we have this great restaurant revival in Maine is the farm-to-table movement. All these new family farms that have been started, most of them just actually cater to the restaurant industry. The brewer, all of the new microbrews that have come forth, all these people are actually interacting with restaurants that could be put at a disadvantage. So at the end of the cycle of increases, on January 1, 2020, Maine would have the third highest minimum wage in the country. When does Maine, or how is Maine supposed to be able to substantiate that? In 2020, that same day, New York City's minimum wage will be $15, California and Long Island and Westchester County will be at $13. Maine will be at $12. There is an impact there. We are not those places. We are a seasonal place, number one, and we don't have the economy that these other people have to be able to sustain this. Even New York State looked at this and took their rural areas to a lower level. So, Curtis, who will this affect? Obviously, people on fixed incomes, they won't get the benefit of any of this increase. The increases that have been COLA for Social Security have been somewhere in the 1.2% range. Menu prices, something's got to give. Some people will have to do drastic things. Other people will raise menu prices. Some will be able to absorb them. Some will not be able to. But there's no question that these folks are going to be behind the curve on that. It'll put us at a significant disadvantage as a tourism destination, as our menu prices will have to be higher than really literally anybody else's in New England. So what may be a $25 steak on Cape Cod could be a $35 steak here in Maine. And when we did the Portland minimum wage referendum, which we were able to defeat, we did some analysis with Becky's menu at Becky's Diner. And literally for her to cover this, and remember, that was $15, but the tipped wage went to $11.25 under the $15, which is similar to this proposal at $12. She would have to double her prices. And she can see her best competitor right across the water in South Portland. She would not be able to compete any longer. And I'm afraid for places like Kittery, Algonquin Wells, places that are close to the New Hampshire border, that they're going to have problems competing with this in a pretty big way. The other people that are going to have a problem with this are obviously young people. I've talked to many people already that are going to limit their hiring, they're going to limit the amount of people that they hire, and they're certainly going to limit the number of inexperienced people that they hire, because $12 is not something that they can afford to pay. So currently the teen unemployment rate in Maine is 10.7, the national unemployment rate is 10.7. The teen rate in Maine is unemployment rate is almost 20%. So I can guarantee you that if this passes, that number will continue to increase. Also, automation. Obviously, those of you who travel, anybody, it's sort of like the chip and pin thing. We seem to be the last one to find out on the face of the earth that it needs to be accomplished. The same is very true in a lot of the food service types of establishments. If you go to Europe or Canada, you see that almost all the quick service restaurants have these to order your food from, and there's one person behind the counter to pick them up. So this initiative at these higher rates could basically fall into a category where it would diminish the number of jobs that people could have, especially at that higher rate. Again, somewhere in the $10 range. When we did 15, we tested 10, and 10 certainly seemed to be something that most people could agree on. But 12 to 15 was quite a bit higher. So it could result in ordering kiosks, iPad ordering devices. All you got to do is go to Western Avenue or any Applebee's, the one in Augusta, they have them. And counter pickup are some of the options that are being used instead of hiring individuals. There's a reason why there's a reason why 42 other states do not eliminate tip credit or have a tip credit. The last state to actually eliminate a tip credit was in 1983. It was in Minnesota. This is a tremendous burden on the restaurant industry. It's very hard for some people to understand what tip credit is. We're going to have to do a lot of work in trying to accomplish that. But I can assure you that that Maine will be an outlier. We'll be the only one east of the Mississippi, and we'll have the second, without a tip credit, the second highest minimum wage east of the Mississippi. And that's a pretty difficult territory to be in. So I guess everybody has their reasons for why they support this, why they don't support it, why they can only afford to pay a certain wage and why they can't. Obviously, everyone has to pay minimum wage. There's nothing you can do about that. And that's a good thing, because people should be entitled to at least that. But everybody, including nonprofits, so Curtis, if you would, actually we'll get beyond the Seattle, Oregon thing. Nonprofits have limited budgets as well. We've seen this, all of us saw this earlier in the year, where the Maine People's Alliance, a proponent of this, actually put out a job for $10 an hour when they were proposing a $12 increase. And so they have a reason for that. They're a nonprofit. They don't have the money to be able to probably pay $12, and that's understandable. One more, Curtis. Another thing that we found in our research is that the person who's going to be speaking in favor of this on his website is only paying $8 an hour for drivers in Auburn. There must be a reason for that. That must be what he's able to pay at the end of the day when he does all the calculations for what he's doing. If you could hit it one more time. I can see the last one. Okay.
Sorry.
All right, well, thank you. I thought I talked fast, but I guess not fast enough. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Greg. Adam, you call up yours.
Are you gonna click those forms?
Yes, I will.
I'm not a big fan of PowerPoint. Good afternoon, my name is Adam Lee, I'm chairman of Lee Auto Malls. I'm speaking in favor of raising Maine's minimum wage, and I point out, it's just raising it to $9 an hour a year. We keep talking about 12, and it will be 12 eventually, but the company that's advertising a job for 10 is offering $2.50 an hour higher than what the current wages are. And we do pay $8 an hour to our part-time drivers. Our minimum wage for all full-time employees is $11 an hour. But part-timers, and we have quite a few who work 20 hours a week, it is $8, and they don't get full benefits. So just full disclosure. So maybe go to the next question. So speaking in favor of raising wages to $9 an hour in 2017, and then it's $1 per year after that till 2020, and then for tip workers, taking a full, basically 8 years to get to $12 an hour. Having and raising minimum wage is not new. It's got nothing to do with who the president is or Bernie Sanders. Our country has an 80-year history of having a minimum wage. It was first established at 25 cents an hour in 1938 under FDR. Since that time, we've raised the minimum wage 22 times. So this is not a new concept. For more than 75 years, real GDP per capita has steadily increased, including years when the minimum wage has gone up. In doing research for this today, what I found was basically I could find facts and figures to back up basically anything anyone wanted to say. In favor, opposed. You could find a study showing you that restaurants will go out of business or that they're thriving in San Francisco or Oregon. And I think you all know this. You guys have heard enough presentations. It's a savvy audience. So I'm sort of trying very hard to stay away from the extremes on either argument. I don't think it's going to revolutionize the economy, and I don't think it's going to put everybody out of business. Most of the data I have, and there's not an awful lot, you can go to the next one, is from the Department of Labor and Bureau of Labor Statistics, here in Maine or federal. I tried to stay away from any of the interested parties. Raising the minimum wage, I will point out, benefits in general. The vast majority of the people who benefit are over 20 years old. They're not teenagers. They do tend to be about 60% or plus women and elderly people. Elderly people work. They're not all retired on a fixed income. They also work, so they will also benefit. You can keep clicking to see if you can catch up with me. To those who will say it make us uncompetitive with New Hampshire and other states, and a lot of people say this, and it often baffles me. I asked the simple question, would we be better off then if we lowered wages? Would we be more competitive in Maine if we went to, let's say, $5 an hour or $4? And would we have employers flocking to the state to take advantage? You've got it. To take advantage of our lower wages? And I don't think they would. I think most employers are more concerned with a trained workforce than with finding someone at a slightly lower pay grade. And I think, in fact, right now, Maine is below the nation in unemployment. It is lower here. We have fuller employment, and I know it's a complicated argument with who's looking and who's not looking for a job. I understand how they measure this. But, well, let me ask this. Raise your hand if you have a business or a restaurant or an inn and you're having trouble finding employees. We're having a very hard time finding anyone at any level. It seems to me that raising wages might help us attract employees. Not drive away employers, but help attract people. Maine has a desperate situation right now. We don't have enough people. Maybe we could attract young people, which is what we need, because we're going backwards. There's a chart. Just stay right there. The chart that was up there, the share of households that are middle class in Maine has gone from, in the year 2000, from about 52% down to 47%. We're dropping. Median income's gone from 51% in 2000 down to 47,000. Share of households spending a third of their income on housing has gone from 26 up to 34%. The trends are all going in the wrong direction. I heard yesterday that for the first time in this nation, the middle class is no longer a majority. It's now the working poor. That's a scary figure. That's not consistent with the history of this nation. Currently, yeah, there, there. If you earn minimum wage and you work full-time, you're earning $1,300 a month. And if you're a couple, it's $2,600. Someone explained to me how you could possibly pay for rent, food, transportation, medical, anything, earning $1,300 a month. I mean, how is that possible? With over 50,000 Mainers working more than one job already, I'm not sure how the average Mainer is going to pull themselves out of poverty. Raising their pay is the best way there is. Mainers want to work for a living. I think we have a long tradition, a reputation of having hard-working people here. We have an old-fashioned sense of pride in working. I don't think people are looking to get handouts. But, you know, they can't just try harder. They have to find a way to earn more money. And as you know, many Mainers who are working receive government help, SNAP, TANF, WIC, there's a long list. And there are a lot of people who really want to see this reduced, including myself. But there's no magic. People can't, they can work 100 hours a week. I mean, how many hours are you going to have to work to reduce it at 750? According to the Maine Center for Economic Policy, I have to throw this in, a left-leaning think tank, that's how they're always described in the newspaper, raising minimum wage will reduce public assistance by 7%. Maine's minimum wage of $7.50 has been at that level for 7 years. It's a really long time. Keep going. There's a chart that shows there. See that for a second. This chart compares 09 to 14. It's the most current I could find. And I think most of these are probably understated. I think the increases are probably higher, except gasoline, which is lower. Milk in that time has gone up 21%. Hamburgers gone up 39%. Eggs have gone up 30%. How is someone supposed to survive, even if they've been working 60 hours for the last 7 years, if everything around them is going up in price except gasoline, which during that time has gone up? But if food and basic things are going up, yet your wages are flat, and you have no way of earning more money. It's not realistic. Predictions of the economy being devastated, or the restaurant industry being forced to lay off dozens, hundreds of thousands, I think are wildly exaggerated. And it really reminds me of the auto industry, which until 2012 had not raised fuel economy standards for 25 years. They have a very, very good lobby, and that lobby was able to get it frozen because the auto industry basically said, if you raise fuel economy standards and make us live to these, we'll go broke. Everyone will go broke. And they said this right up to the point where they went bankrupt. Keep in mind, the standards hadn't been raised yet. They went bankrupt and had to come to the federal government for bailouts. And then the federal government said, then you've got to stop fighting these things. They put in place in 2012, so this is 4 years ago, fuel economy, what you actually get on a car today is 25% higher. That's in about 3 years they did this. It's gone up 25%. We've just finished the third record year in the auto industry. It's due to a whole bunch of factors. One of them is people want to get cars that get better fuel economy. It's not a good analogy other than the sky is not falling. And this is always the case. Both sides argue the sky is falling, on one level or another. Another criticism is that raising the minimum wage will lead to inflation. There are plenty of studies that say it won't, but the fact is, even if it leads to a little bit of inflation, it's not terrible. Deflation is terrible. A little bit of inflation does not hurt industry, and there are many studies saying it won't. When people are opposed to increasing minimum wage, describe all the terrible things that are going to happen. I have to ask some basic questions. We survived gas going from $2 a gallon in 07 to $4 in 08, back to $1.50 in 09, back to $4 in 2011, and then back to $2 today. We have a really robust economy. It takes these massive swings and it adjusts, and it does it consistently. We've watched the same thing with heating oil. We have the lowest interest rates we've had since the 50s, and maybe even earlier. Our economy is robust. We can handle increasing wages. It will adjust, and I really think this is the best time to be raising the minimum wage. There are a lot of huge benefits, including attracting young people. The people of Maine deserve this. You can keep going. I've got lots of citations and studies, just to keep clicking. I'm not sure what else in there. If people are interested, I and I have 47 seconds left. I'll gladly give it to the next speaker.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. All right, we're down to 3 questions. Representative Groman to choose the next one.
Okay.
P1, question 1. All right. And Representative Cooper, you choose pro or con? Once again, the con gets to go first. Oh, I'll take that one back. All right. Nope.
Okay, so you got to prefer. Can I take this off too?
Yep, you can do whatever you want.
All right.
Introduce yourself, so you get a chance to introduce yourself.
We'll walk here and talk. So my name is Scott Garnier. I am with the No on One campaign. Our coalition is called Mainers Protecting Our Youth and Communities, which really is the crux of our argument, which we'll be getting into in the next 10 minutes. So just my background is I'm a parent of 3 kids. I'm a lifelong Mainer. I live in Gray. I've been in the field of addiction prevention for over 10 years. So I've been living this for over a decade, seeing what addiction does, particularly to our young people. So that's what I bring to the table. And I stepped up to the plate about 3 years ago to be engaged on this topic, while Portland was looking at their ordinance because the conversation was very one-sided. It's about all the pro-industry kind of stuff. It's time to balance that out with the science and the public health and reality of what a legal marijuana industry would actually do to Maine and to our youth. So that's what I'm here to talk about. So our coalition, Mainers Protecting Our Youth and Communities, is a pretty robust coalition. We've got a great steering committee of a dozen folks from all around the state, plus precinct captains that we've already got set up. We've got a number of organizations that have been signing on, which you can see at our website, notonmymainstreet.com, that's with an E. So lots of folks are joining the fight. And this is why we're here to oppose question 1. And so there's 3 key arguments I want to go over in these next 10 minutes. The first one is the reason we picked the URL notonmymainstreet.com is because really that's one of the things that this boils down to. Think of your main town, your main community. Think of Main Street. Are there open storefronts right now? Where are those located? Where I live in Gray, there's one right now next to the ice cream stand. There's another one that's next to the subway. If question 1 passes, what could go into those storefronts? Marijuana pot shops or pot bars. The bars are legal immediately. The shops, it does take some time to get those up and running, but those bars would be legal immediately. Those could be set up right away. So we have to think, what does that do to the character of our community? What kind of norms and messages does that send to our youth? So here's some of our concerns when we're looking at the pot shops that would be legalized. So we think about regulating marijuana like alcohol. Right now, there's hundreds of alcohol licenses throughout the state. I mean, in Lewis and Auburn alone, where I used to work, there's over 100 alcohol licenses. So if we're regulating it like alcohol, we could literally see hundreds of licenses and shops throughout the state. So think again about those open storefronts that are in your community. What are they next to? Are they open? Are they next to mom and pop shops? What would your kids see while you're walking down Main Street? Another concern are some of the loopholes in question 1. Provide little to no local control. We're seeing that issue right now with the medical marijuana laws where towns cannot completely prohibit marijuana cultivation sites. The best they can do is a moratorium while they try to figure out where they're gonna put it, but they can't keep it out of their community if they want to. There's a loophole in question 1 that if you attach a retail marijuana shop to a cultivation site, it doesn't actually count as a retail marijuana site. So if you say you can have 0 retail shops, you attach that to a cultivation shop, well, that's 0. So that could still be allowed. There's no penalties listed in question 1 for selling to minors. In fact, worse, the initiative actually specifically shields pot shops from responsibility to ascertain whether or not an ID presented to them is valid. With alcohol, that's not the case. There's responsibility on the retailers to make sure that the ID that presented to them is valid. They have to check, they have to be trained in that. There's no such requirement for question one. Restriction on employers. My dad is a safety director for a lumber mill up in the county. So workplace safety, having workers who are on the ball and not impaired, that's a big deal. Question one provides some problems for folks like him. It would prohibit businesses from choosing not to hire drug users or discipline or fire employees who use pot anywhere else but on the employer's property. So that means someone uses a couple hours before they come to work, as long as they're not using on the property. This is going to tie the hands of employers for keeping those folks from coming to the workplace. So that means question one is forcing employers to bear the risk of what happens when that impaired employee comes in and injures or kills another coworker. Back to pot shops and pot bars. Think again about those open storefronts that you might have in your community. Replace those empty storefronts with these displays, which are the marijuana edibles that are flourishing in Colorado and creating a host of public health problems. Products like these are a picture of actual products that are for sale right now in Colorado. Peach rings, chocolate bars, fruity pebble bars sprayed with THC, fruit punches. This is what today's marijuana looks like. It's not just a joint. It's not the weak joint that was sold. This is not Woodstock weed. This is a much more potent product that's being developed into products that are clearly marketed towards youth. More. Cupcakes, Easter cookies, your vaping devices, which are being designed to be more and more discreet, otherwise known as undetectable. Over 200 marijuana edible products are for sale from Colorado. This is what would be coming to Maine if question one passes. And so gummy bears, chocolate bars, so unsurprisingly, there's a huge increase in 0 to 5-year-olds who are going to the ERs because they're being exposed to marijuana because they're confusing a THC gummy bear for a non-THC gummy bear. Can you spot the difference between these two? Can you pick out which ones are the THC gummy bears and which ones aren't? Would your kids be able to detect that? Think of educators, think of a full lunchroom with lunch bags all over the place. You've got 5 kids in there that have these in there. How would you find them? How would you spot them? This would be a nightmare for our schools. And so, unsurprisingly, back in 2006, before they had commercialized medical marijuana or recreational marijuana, they were 14th in the nation for youth use of marijuana. Now they are number 1 in the nation. And it's part of why. So the THC content is going through the roof. We've basically got an arms race right now between folks to get the THC content up. And from the folks that I hear that are experts in addiction in Colorado, right now the strongest marijuana you can get in the nation is not from the black market, it's from the legal market in Colorado. That is where the strongest marijuana is, because the commercial market is putting pressure on to increase that. And this is what we're talking about. This is monitoring the future. This is a federal study that goes back to 1975 that monitors the perception of risk of marijuana amongst youth and the use. And what you can see is this is almost a perfect mirror image. When the perception of risk goes down, use goes up, and vice versa. So you can see right now we're in this trend where, again, perception of risk is starting to go down. In Maine right now, it's 60% of youth, high school youth, think there's no risk from regular use of marijuana. And so unsurprisingly, with that perception of risk going down, use is starting to go up across the country. So I think the question we need to ask is, what do we want our youth reaching for? Do we want them literally reaching for gummy bears that are in the homes or in schools? Do we want them reaching for success? Because my experience, again, being in this field for over 10 years, is that marijuana is a huge educational barrier. I know we have another question on the ballot looking at increasing access to education. Marijuana is a huge barrier to education. So I would pose that if you're going to vote in favor of a question that's going to increase access, you don't want to vote in favor of this question because it's going to defeat that initiative. It's going to be counterproductive. So in the end, question one is wrong for me. It's wrong for Maine parents, it's wrong for our youth, it's wrong for our schools, it's wrong for our employers, and it's wrong for our future. The previous question, we're looking at the workforce and our needs around the workforce. legalizing marijuana, creating a huge, big marijuana commercial industry where the pot shop's literally minutes away, where a young person just has to give 20 bucks to a 22-year-old, that is not going to take us in the right direction for developing our workforce. It's not going to take us in the right direction for making sure our youth are achieving, succeeding, and living up to the dreams that they set for themselves. So we have to ask our question, do we want to pass this and give big marijuana their market, or do we want to work on building up our youth, building up access to education, and then moving Maine forward? This will not move Maine forward, this will move Maine backwards. So I encourage you to vote no on one, and we have some more materials out on the desks, and I will also end with this slide. So visit the website. If you're interested in volunteering or donating, please go. Find us on social media. And please give me a call, send me an email. Glad to come out and speak at other places or answer any questions folks have. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. And now we have Alicia Melnick, Political Director for the Campaign to Regulate Marijuana.
Thank you. My name is Alicia Melnick. I'm the Political Director for the Yes on One campaign. And I'm also a lifelong Mainer, and I'm also a parent of 2 young children who are about to enter public schools in Maine. And I just want to give you a very short background about why I got involved in the Yes on One campaign and why I'm convinced that it's time for Maine to legalize, tax, and regulate marijuana for adult use. When I was at the ACLU of Maine, I was integrally involved in developing Maine's current medical marijuana law, focusing on protections for patients, caregivers, and dispensary operators, and providing this vital medicine to seriously ill people in our state. Over the years, I've had countless conversations with Maine people who have told me their stories about how they got their loved one back, how their husband or their child or their parent was able to finally eat, to laugh, to again hug their children and get out of bed, and to dramatically reduce their use and dependence on highly addictive opioids. And I've had countless meetings with caregivers and dispensary operators and their employees about the economic benefits that they've found and to other businesses in their community. In addition, personally over the past year, one of my best friends died from brain cancer, and I was able to work with a young man who was charged with multiple felonies because he was cultivating marijuana for his seriously ill brother and other legal patients, qualified patients in Maine. All told, these experiences have convinced me that it's time to legalize, tax, and regulate marijuana for adult use in Maine. So what are the facts? The majority of Maine people, like the majority of Americans, support legalizing marijuana. Marijuana prohibition has wasted law enforcement and judicial resources and ruined countless lives, both by keeping it out of the hands of patients who could have benefited tremendously from it and from the lifelong criminal justice and social repercussions of arrests and citations. And from a governing and policy perspective, the overwhelming costs and wasted resources of this failed policy have convinced 25 states and counting to pass laws allowing for medicinal use, with 4 states and counting passing measures to legalize adult use. It's time for Maine to follow suit. So what does voting yes on one do? The initiative would create common sense regulatory system that allows adults who choose to use marijuana to do so in a safe and regulated environment. It allows adults 21 years of age and older to purchase and possess a limited amount of marijuana, grow a limited amount of marijuana plants in their homes, and possess the marijuana produced by those plants. It will remain illegal to consume marijuana in public, and it will remain illegal to sell or provide marijuana to children. It establishes a tightly controlled system of licensed marijuana retail stores, cultivation facilities, manufacturing facilities, and testing facilities, and creates rules governing production, testing, transportation, and sale, including labeling and packaging requirements and restrictions on marketing to children. It does allow for local control. Maine cities and towns will have the right to regulate, limit, or prohibit the operation of marijuana establishments based on the opinions and feelings of its residents. This was also the case in Colorado, and many cities and towns there have chosen to allow for these establishments to occur there because they saw the benefits as far outweighing the deficits. It would enact a 10% sales tax on adult use marijuana that would cover the cost of implementation and would provide much needed revenue to fund vital existing state programs such as schools, police, treatment and prevention programs, and other vital infrastructure and services. It will remain illegal to drive under the influence, and employers will be able to maintain current employment policies, including those that require employees to come to work sober. It does not touch the medical marijuana program, leaving in place the valuable structure and relationships that have benefited seriously ill Mainers for years. So why is it important to pass Yes on 1? It frees up law enforcement to focus on true public safety issues that threaten our communities. It brings marijuana into a tightly regulated and taxed environment. It generates valuable revenue and creates much needed jobs throughout the state, expands access for therapeutic use, and prevents the criminalization of otherwise law-abiding adults who choose to use marijuana for therapeutic and other reasons. First, I want to talk a little bit more about law enforcement. Regulating and taxing marijuana for adults will free up law enforcement to focus on serious crimes and true public safety issues that threaten our communities, like domestic violence and the opioid crisis that's crippling our state. Currently, valuable law enforcement and court resources are being wasted on punishing otherwise law-abiding adults for minor marijuana offenses. Our police devote thousands of hours to arresting, booking, and imprisoning marijuana growers and users, most of whom, again, are otherwise law-abiding and contribute to their communities. In Maine, like the rest of the nation, about half of all drug arrests and citations are related to marijuana. And this policy not only takes officers and judges away from more urgent issues, it can have serious and lifelong consequences for those who are arrested and cited, damaging prospects for jobs, loans, housing, and other important benefits. In states that have legalized adult use, arrests for simple possession are down 90%, saving a huge amount of police and court time and freeing up those resources for more important issues, and also saving significant taxpayer money. Second, Yes on 1 will bring much needed jobs and revenue to our state that can be used to fund our schools, substance abuse prevention and treatment programs, state and local police, and other important services. It's predicted that Maine would see tens of millions of dollars in tax revenue alone, and that's not counting the amount of revenue that would come back to our communities from ancillary businesses, such as HVAC, electricians, realtors, attorneys, and those that are engaged in supporting marijuana-related businesses. Again, this industry is happening across the state of Maine already, but the revenue is not being captured in any way that taxpayers and Mainers can benefit from. Marijuana cultivation and use by passing Yes on 1, we would be able to tax and regulate it and benefit Maine people. It will also increase access for ill Mainers to use therapeutically. Epilepsy, pain from AIDS, nausea from chemotherapy, glaucoma, Crohn's disease, muscle spasms, and an ever-expanding list of other conditions are being effectively treated by cannabis. And despite the progress in Maine law, many Maine patients continue to face barriers to accessing cannabis for conditions including opioid dependence and chronic pain. Cost, limited approved conditions, doctor's refusal, or inability to provide recommendations all create barriers for Mainers who would otherwise be able to benefit from marijuana use. Patients and doctors should be able to determine the best treatments and have ready access to marijuana without fear of committing a crime, losing benefits, or facing the social stigma and discrimination currently associated with marijuana use. Loosening marijuana laws would help many of these people, but repealing prohibition would help all of them. By placing these decisions back in the hands of patients and their treatment providers, as opposed to the government, Yes on 1 could help many Maine patients. The benefits of criminalization are also minuscule to non-existent, and the benefits of regulation and taxation are many. Making marijuana legal for private adult use would allow us to control and regulate it rather than allowing criminals to control distribution and quality. Criminals, I might add, who never ID their customers. Yes on 1 will protect our children by bringing marijuana behind the counter where IDs can be checked, will protect adult users by ensuring testing and labeling for potency, and expanding access for patients. In states like Colorado that have approved adult use, they have seen no increase in youth use. I will repeat that. They have seen no increase in youth use. And there's an article out front that you can take that's from the Department of Public Health that says as much. In fact, what they have found is that relationships with loving, healthy adults are the most important factor in reducing risk-taking behavior among young people. And that's something that I think we all should be working on. Marijuana prohibition has failed. It's failed at reducing drug use, and it's failed at reducing access, despite huge, huge fiscal costs. Meanwhile, in states that have legalized, again, youth use is steady or down, crime is down, and revenue for much needed services is up. There are reasons that even people who choose not to use marijuana support legalization. Legal substances can be controlled in ways illegal ones cannot. As pointed out by the New York Times, science and government have learned a lot about how to keep alcohol and tobacco out of the hands of minors. And this initiative builds on this knowledge by including things like prohibitions on marketing to youth and child-resistant packaging. It is the illegal market with no standards, regulations, or quality controls that threaten our public health. The bottom line is that when we review the facts and data from other states, the less it seems there's any reason at all for marijuana prohibition. Legalizing, regulating, and taxing marijuana has tremendous potential to do good in Maine. It will redirect scarce law enforcement resources to address serious and violent crime. It will bolster Maine's economy by creating jobs throughout the state and generating tax revenue within the industry itself and within ancillary services and businesses, and will replace the underground market with a tightly controlled system of legitimate licensed tax-paying businesses that will test for safety, label for potency, and ID buyers to ensure sales are made only to adults 21 and over. For too long, Maine has engaged in this failed policy, and the results have been disastrous. We've spent too much money, wasted law enforcement and judicial resources, squandered the opportunity to create much-needed jobs and revenue, and subjected otherwise law-abiding Maine citizens to criminal justice and social consequences, all while doing little to reduce use or availability. It's time to put our resources into passing reforms that bring adult use of marijuana out of the dark so we can regulate it and tax it. Legalizing, taxing, and regulating marijuana for adult use is smart, humane policy. The evidence is clear. The time has come to end marijuana prohibition. We urge you to vote yes on 1.
Great, thank you. All right, down to 2 questions. I don't know which ones are questions. You choose one of those, please. Question 2. Finally, the pro side gets
All right.
first. And now we know what the last question is. All right. You have a PowerPoint, right?
Yes, I do, sir. Yeah. On the back. This one. Great, thank you everybody, and thank you for putting this together. I think this is the first time all 5 ballot initiatives are in the same room. My name is John Kaczynski. I am so lucky and happy to be the campaign manager for Yes on Question 2. I live in Brunswick, just up the road. 3 young kids, 2 of them, my 7-year-old and 5-year-old, are getting ready to go back to school. And my 2-year-old, if I have my way, will be in boarding school in a couple of weeks. But I care deeply about public schools. I was a teacher myself. I care deeply about making sure our kids are getting the best educational opportunities possible. So question 2 is on the ballot. It's also called the Stand Up for Students question. And I want to just present some information here. There's been a lot of misinformation so far about this campaign. A lot of people use their own facts and figures when talking about school funding, but I'm going to try to set the record straight. Fact number 1, in 2008-2009, the state contribution to public schools was $983 million. Wow, sounds like a lot of money, right? $983 million in 2008-2009. In 2015-2016, the school year that just passed, this past June, the state contribution to public schools was, drum roll please, $983 million. The exact same figure from 8 years ago is what the state was contributing to fund public education. So in 2008, that accounted for 54% of the cost of public schools, but in the last school year, that was closer to 47% of the the cost of public education. What's important to remember as well is that we got to adjust for inflation. We all know $1 today isn't the same as it was in 2008. And when you actually look at inflation, our schools have been short funded $83 million from where they were funded 8 years ago. And what this does, folks may remember in 2003 and 2004, the voters of this state asked the state to fund 55% of the cost of public schools. That number was not pulled out of the air. That was a thoughtful number that was developed based on the local ability to pay property taxes. And what you'll see is the first year, 2008-2009, the state was really close. That was the first year of implementing the 55%. And as you can see, we have now been treading water for several years, and it's the same show in the Appropriations Committee in Augusta. It's teachers, parents, school board members showing up, begging for more money, and we're getting little bumps, but as you can see, we're not moving the dial. I want to say a couple other things about 55%. The 55% is defined in law as an adequacy model of public education. I call it the Chevette model of public schools. This is not the Cadillac version. This is defined as the bare bones, the minimum that it takes to make sure that all kids are proficient in the 7 content areas that the state has determined. So heaven forbid a local community wants to provide the Cadillac model of public education to those kids. That comes on the backs of the property taxpayers. So, and this is another thing about the 55% that some people don't know. When the state doesn't fund 55%, they write it into the state budget that property taxes go up just to make up for the shortfall of the state. So what we have seen is called minimum mill rate expectation. It's another word for property taxes. So over the past, since 2008, there has been $1.4 billion shifted onto property taxes just to make up for the state shortfall to fund the Chevette model of public education. This is not sustainable. This is not sustainable for our schools. This is not sustainable for our communities. And what's more, and you might hear something different from Mr. Gilman, but the fact is the legislature just spent 5 years and $500,000 for a nonpartisan expert firm to come in and study our school funding formula. And what they said, first of all, was we have the most equitable funding formula in the country. Most equitable funding formula in the country. Number 2, they thought 55% wasn't even the Chevette. They thought it was the 2-wheeled Chevette. Because what they said was we need $320 million more to adequately fund our schools. What's been happening is the more we rely on property taxes to fund our public schools, the more inequity and disparity we are creating in our school system. And I can provide examples. Anybody wants to talk about this, looking at the experience of Camden versus Rockland, 2 towns right next to each other, with very different educational experiences for kids, simply because of the over-reliance on property taxes to adequately fund our public education system. Here's something I heard somebody else talking about, sort of some of the problems facing Maine. This chart should scare the petunias out of any policymaker in this state. Because the fact is, our schools are dealing with more and more than ever before. You look at this is the percent from the Maine DOE eligible for free and reduced lunch. In 2006, 2007, about 34% of the children in the state of Maine were eligible for free and reduced lunch. Today, it's going up every single year. It is now approaching 47% of the children in Maine are eligible for free and reduced lunch. The eligibility has not changed. It has remained the same. But what's happening is more kids who are showing up to school are now living at 180% or below federal poverty. That's a fact. And we know from research that those kids are going to have more challenges. They're going to have more learning challenges, more behavioral challenges, more social and emotional needs that the schools are being asked to meet, yet we're being funded at the same rate that we were 8 years ago. This isn't sustainable. Let's talk about mandates. Because the legislature has passed on several new mandates, and I'm not going to debate whether or not these mandates are good or bad, but they all cost money. Proficiency-based diploma, something that the Chamber has supported, that's a huge undertaking of drastically changing the way we award diplomas, drastically changing the curriculum in our high schools, drastically changing the way teachers teach. And yet it's not funded. So all of these things, Common Core, new testing, proficiency-based, new teacher evaluation systems, retirement costs, charter schools, have all been pushed onto local property taxpayers and have all been pushed to further diminish the state contribution to public schools. Again, the proficiency-based new teacher evaluation systems, probably great ideas. In fact, they are pretty good ideas, but we're not funding them. So when the state passes that and requires schools to make this wholesale change in teaching in schools, there's no money attached to it, and it's the local property taxpayers that are asked to pick up the bill on that. At the same time that we have continued to shortchange our schools, we have seen 2 large tax cuts out of Augusta that overwhelmingly benefit the wealthiest Mainers. Here's one chart that shows that 55% of those tax cuts from 2011 and 2015 went to the top 20%. Here's another one. Let's look at it by group. So average tax cut by income group. When you look at the cumulative impact of the 2011 and the 2015 tax cuts, what you'll see is the top 1% is getting about $5,600 more per year, and the rest of us are getting somewhere between $200 and $600. And in many of your communities, that income tax reduction is going to be eaten up by your property tax increases, let alone the sales tax increase that was also passed to help fill the gap. So at the same time we're giving tax breaks to the wealthy, property taxes around the state are escalating and our schools are suffering the consequences. That's what gets us to stand up for students. Just to be clear on what it is. 3% surcharge on household income over $200,000. Some people are saying, well, this is a 10.15% tax rate. This is going to be the second highest in the nation. False, inaccurate, because it only applies to the amount over $200,000. So someone would have to make about $350,000 a year before they get to the same tax rate that we had in place prior to 2011. Which was a little, almost 9%. They would have to make $350,000 because it only applies to the income over $200,000. The Nonpartisan Office of Fiscal Planning and Review said this generates $157 million statewide, which is just pretty damn close to that 55%. It says in the initiative, requires funding from the surcharge be used for direct classroom instruction. And that is defined as school nurses, social workers, teachers, ed techs. We want this money going as close to the students as possible. It cannot be used for administration. That is abundantly clear in the language. These funds cannot be used for administration. I know a lot of voters out there think we spend too much on administration. I'm not here to defend administration. I think we have some good administrators in this state. But we're making sure that the funding in this initiative goes directly, as close to the children as possible, for direct classroom instruction. It provides property tax relief. Again, getting back to that minimum mill rate. When they don't fund 55%, that minimum mill rate goes up. We have seen about a 20% increase in the minimum mill rate that towns have to raise to fund public education since 2008. This is going to drive that minimum mill rate back down to 7%. It impacts approximately 2% of all Maine households. I guess we've got a minute left here. And so people are mad. You see it. It's in the electorate. People are angry. And one thing they're angry about, which is clear from every poll that we have done, is they feel like the wealthy and the corporations are moving ahead and the middle class is moving backward. And you heard Adam Lee talking about the middle class no longer being majority. Here's the effective income tax rate. Here's the effective tax rate by income. And as you can see, some of those concerns are legitimate. Here's what it would look like after Stand Up for Students. So we still have the middle class, the middle 20 and the fourth 20 paying the largest effective rate in taxes when you include property taxes, income taxes, and sales taxes. These are not my numbers. These are the Maine Center for Economic Policy numbers based on figures provided by the Maine Revenue Services. So this isn't something I came up with in my free time. This is folks, economists from the Maine Center of Economic Policy using Maine Revenue Service data to develop that information. We got 95,000 signatures in 3 months. We hope you'll join us and stand up for students and vote yes in November. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
And now Ben Gilman from the Maine State Chamber of Commerce.
Thanks, John. My name is Ben Gilman. I'm with the Maine State Chamber of Commerce. I too am a parent. I have 4 kids, so I got you by 1, John.
Yeah. Let me keep working.
Here to talk about our opposition to question 2. The Maine State Chamber of Commerce is a strong supporter of education in this state. Our workforce of the future are our students today, and we believe in fair, equitable funding of our students throughout the state of Maine. So we're not here to question education funding for our students. We believe we should fully fund our education students. This is the wrong solution to the problem. This is the wrong solution. John kind of has a different take on the tax rate than we do, but it will put us in the highest tax rate of 10.15% for incomes between $200,000 and $526,000. That's going to make a difference when you're trying to recruit doctors to rural Maine. That's going to make a difference when you're trying to recruit high-tech workers to get to the state of Maine. And this is also going to make a difference in terms of retirees. If you're looking at states to retire in, 10.15% if you're a high-income earner. And you have other states like Florida you can look at. 6 months in a day, we all know what happens. Which state are you going to choose? The highest income tax rate in your income bracket or a state with 0 income tax? It's going to impact our economy. It's going to impact 16,000 tax filers in the state of Maine. Everyone wants to say it's the wealthy individuals that are going to be paying this tax. 16,000 of them. I got news for you. 11,000 of those filers are businesses. They are S-corps, they are LLCs, they are sole proprietors, pass-through corporations. These are small companies, family businesses, fishermen, farmers, are now going to be in the highest tax rate in the country here in the state of Maine. If you're on the New Hampshire border, I mean, what's to stop you from going over 10%? I know we disagree on the tax rate, but it is going to make you in the highest tax rate in that $200,000 to $526,000 alone for this economy. But that's not the big issue in terms of question 2. We know it's going to impact our economy, and we're going to fund education, for our economy. It's the education fairness that's surrounding this question that you look at. I like this slogan that everything you need to know in life you learned in kindergarten. And one of those things that you learn in kindergarten is to always be truthful. I teach that to my 4 kids. We've got to be truthful about this. And I love how the proponents of question 2 look at this and they say, every student in every zip code in this state will benefit. I agree. I say to the Legislative Policy Committee all the time, shouldn't make a difference if you live in Greenville or Cape Elizabeth, the quality of your education. It shouldn't. And I'm not choosing my facts here to prove my point. This morning I went to the Maine Education Association website and I downloaded their distribution of the $157 million that will be raised through this income tax at the expense of our economy. 85 communities here in the state of Maine will receive $0 from this. 85 communities. Small communities. Well, you think those must be the rich communities. They're not going to get any. They're already funding education. These are communities like Bristol, Acton, Cooper, Crawford, Dennistown. Small communities are not going to. They're going to not receive $1 from this education funding. A law that they wrote. It gets better. If you look at this, and you can go on the Maine Education website, and this is their document, you look at the towns that can benefit. 85 out of the 230 school units, 40% will not receive $1 from the $157 million raised. Another 36 towns residing in RSUs also receive no money from this funding. Another 31 towns throughout the state receive little, less than $100,000. So who benefits? Who benefits? Where's all this money going? I can tell you who benefits. %12 of the towns receive 60% of the dollars. Brunswick, Cape Elizabeth, Falmouth, Portland, Scarborough, South Portland, Freeport, and Yarmouth. The funding formula John talked about, they choose to spend $47 million above EPS. They are funding the Cadillac. They receive an additional $35 million under this proposal. Greenville, 0. So where's this money going? We're going to raise this money. It's going to go, John's right, it goes to direct student classroom instruction. They have an ad I just saw up. It's a very good ad. It has teachers talking about desks and erasers. I can't find, have enough desks for my students. I don't have enough erasers in the classroom. So I said, let's go look at, we're going to raise $157 million. We must be able to buy some new desks for the students. Well, if you go and read the law word for word, direct support for student learning is salary and benefits for public classroom teachers. I support teachers, special teachers of reading and mathematics, literacy specialists, career technical education teachers, education technicians, associate teachers, assistant teachers, special education technicians, guidance staff, health staff, librarians, and media assistants. Salaries. I like teachers and I believe that, some teachers deserve a raise. It does not go for classroom technology. This money cannot be used for. It cannot be used for new desks, for erasers, school construction, our schools, if you need new schools. None of this money raised through question 2 can go through that. This referendum was written by the teachers union. It goes to the teachers union. That's where the money goes. So, it's the wrong solution to a problem that we have in the state. There's no question we want to get to 55%. And if you look at our budget and our numbers, John talked about in terms of the tax cuts that we had recently, we now have in excess of $95 million in our surplus. If you add teacher retirement to it, we're about $95 million short of 55%. Not the 157, we may disagree about that. But there are other ways to solve this problem. It's not to put complicated tax policy on our ballot here in the state. We all stood here, we went through the Tabor days, we stood with the teachers back in the Tabor days and opposed putting complicated tax policy on the ballot. Unfortunately here, we're on the other side from them that we should not be deciding complicated tax policy. The funding formula is complicated, it should be decided in Augusta, and we should reject this because it's the wrong solution at the expense of our economy. We don't think it's going to impact our economy making Maine second to California in income, about $526,000. That's a gamble I don't think we should take. We shouldn't take it at the expense of our small businesses, our family-owned businesses here in the state. It's not the wealthy individuals. It is those 11,000 small business filers here in Maine. So I just want to take a time, and I told you before earlier, in terms of the communities that are going to benefit, 35 million, 12% of the communities, 30 communities are going to get 60% of the dollars. Do these sound like rich communities? These sound like the communities that we need to be sending the dollars to. We should do it more equitably. Acton, Bennington, Blue Hill, Bowerbag, Bremen, Bristol, Brooklyn, Carrollton. This is from Maine Education website. These guys are getting no dollars. Castine, Cooper, Cranberry Island, Crawford, Eustis, Georgetown, Grand Lake Stream, Greenville, Isle Hot, Isle Barrows, Lakeville, Lemoyne, I'm skipping through, Lincolnville, Wrenchboro, Machiasport, $0. Most people I talk to, if you read that question, they think, great, our rural areas need more money for education, they need better schools, they need more technology for the classroom. That's not the solution. The money goes to the rich get richer, and the poor communities get nothing. I'm a Mainer, we never operate like that. So let's go through a few more. Monhegan, Mount Desert, Noblesboro, Northfield, Northport, Orient, Otis, Penobscot, Portage, that's a very rural community. Long Island here in Casco Bay, Roque Bluffs, St. George, Sedgwick, Shirley, South Bristol, Southport, Surrey, the Forks, up in Western Maine, all rural areas get 0. Remember that. Wesley, West Bath. You go into some of the RSUs and say, okay, well, some RSUs are going to benefit, but towns with it, why not? Aroostook, Phippsburg, Weld, Byron, Hanover, Roxbury, Cushing, Owlshead, South Palmerston, Rome, Eastbrook, Sorrento, Gouldsboro, Winter Harbor, Wayne, Newry, 0. Hershey, Monroe, Mount Chase, Bridgeton, Casco, Sebago, Denmark, Level, Stoneham, Sweden, Harpswell, Great Mountain, Osborne, Deer Isle, Stonington, Camden, Rockport, Bremen, Damascrata, 0. Booth Bay Harbor, 0. Deer Isle, Stonington, they're doing a great job down there. If you see their boat building and how they're doing proficiency education, which is positive, $0 to Deer Isle, Stonington. Wells, Algonquin, $0. I'm not here to say we're not fully funding education. I think we should fully fund education. The Maine State Chamber of Commerce has put out documents making Maine work. We need a workforce for tomorrow. This is the wrong solution. Thank you.
So we're to our final question, which is the ranked choice voting question. And just want to remind folks that after this is done, at 5 o'clock, we're having a reception out in the courtyard. So please stay and join us. Continue the conversation. That's what we wanted to spur here with today's forum. So. Yes, pro side wants to go first. So our two speakers are Kyle Bailey, representing the pro side, and Representative Heather Siraki, representing the opposite side.
Good. Or fifth, Representative Siraki, imagine that.
It's the trigger.
The trigger thing. Oh, right there?
Right there, yeah.
Okay, great.
Perfect.
Well, my name's Kyle Bailey. I'm the campaign manager for the Committee for Ranked Choice Voting. Thank you very much for having us here today. I'm going to talk for just a minute about what ranked choice voting is and why it matters and how it works. And then I'm going to try to address some frequently asked questions, try to capture it in some of the things that I anticipate Representative Siraki might say about this issue. I try to give you some perspective on the issue. So, we could probably sit here and come up with a long list of the things that frustrate us or make us downright angry about our politics today. A lot of us are feeling like it's not working, as it should. And so we really need a system that works. where candidates with the best ideas and not the biggest bank accounts have a fighting chance. Question 5 is a nonpartisan reform that really gives voters more voice in our democracy. So you never have to vote for the lesser of two evils when there's another candidate you really like. You never feel like your vote is wasted. You have the freedom to vote for the candidate you like the best without worrying you'll have to like the candidate you like the least. And candidates are elected more broadly. Ranked choice voting restores majority rule, so candidates have to reach beyond their base, appeal more broadly, and be more consensus-oriented. That was not working. All right, so if approved by voters, question 5 would enact ranked choice voting, which is the most cost-effective and efficient way to conduct a runoff. It would apply to general and primary elections for U.S. Senate, Congress, Governor, Maine Senate, and Maine House. So let's take a look at how ranked choice voting works. So in races with more than 2 candidates, you would have the power, the opportunity to rank those candidates in order of your individual preference, from your favorite to your least favorite. So in this example, I really like yellow the best. They're my favorite candidate. They share my values and principles. I think they do a great job. And I look at the other 2 candidates and, orange knocked on my door. I don't agree with them on everything, but I think they have integrity, character. I think they do a decent job. Now, purple is not my cup of tea. I don't care for them. I can rank them as my third choice or not at all. My vote will never count for them. So it captures your true preferences as a voter. Let's go to the next one. And the process for tabulating ballots is pretty darn simple. We look to, on election night, count up all of the ballots to see who is everybody's first choice. Who do you like the best as a voter? And in this example, 40% of voters like purple the best, 35% of voters like orange the best, and 25% of voters like yellow the best. But no candidate has reached that 50% plus 1 threshold, that majority threshold. So we look to see which candidate's in last place. That's yellow. Yellow is eliminated. Next slide. So now we're going to have what is sometimes called an instant runoff. We retabulate the ballots until we get to a majority winner. So if you liked purple or orange the best, they're your favorite candidate, your vote still counts for them in this instant runoff. But if you liked yellow the best, we look to see who is your second choice on your ballot. Literally pick up your ballot and move it to the pile for purple or orange. And in this example, what we see is orange wins with 55% of the vote. The vast majority of people who like yellow the best, 20% of that 25%, ranked orange as their second choice. So if you like purple or orange, your vote still counts for them as your first choice, but if you like yellow the best, your candidate's been eliminated. This works exactly like runoffs do, like actual runoffs do, which a lot of places have. Let's go to the next slide. So here's Peter Mills, former senator, Republican from Cornville, and the Maine Turnpike Authority head. He's really looked at this and said, not only is it cost efficient, but the ballots are really quite simple for voters to understand. We rank choices every day of our lives. Next slide. Congresswoman Shelley Pingree's looked at this and has been a long-time supporter. And she thinks that really making candidates reach beyond their base for not just first choice rankings, but second choice rankings is a fundamental change in our democracy that makes politicians more accountable to a majority of voters, to more people. So you can't just win by preaching to the choir and exciting your base. Next slide. U.S. Senator John McCain, Republican from Arizona, has been a supporter of ranked choice voting, saying elected leaders will be more likely to listen to all. Next slide. So our coalition includes 200 state and federal elected officials, over 100 local elected officials, clergy, business leaders, labor leaders, organizations like the Nonpartisan League of Women Voters of Maine, 5 newspapers, 3 of Maine's 4 political parties support ranked choice voting in its platform, 3 former chairs of the Maine Republican Party, 3 former speakers of the House, 3 former Senate presidents. The Presbyterian Church USA supports ranked choice voting, as does the Universalist, Unitarian Universalists, and the list goes on. Next. So just a brief background about this initiative. Opponents might say that this is an out-of-state experiment being imposed upon us by Mainers. Well, the conversations about reform in Maine have been going back to the 1990s. And in fact, the first ranked choice voting bill was introduced in 2001 when independent Angus King was governor. And there was a push by Republican legislators and some Democrats after John Baldacci, a Democrat, was reelected with 38% of the vote in 2006. And in 2007, they introduced legislation. In 2008, the League of Women Voters of Maine began studying election reforms. They looked at a lot of different options. We'll talk about those in a minute. Portland used ranked choice voting successfully in its first time in 2011. That's the same year the League endorsed ranked choice voting. And in October of 2015, after a grassroots push, something I've never really seen before, over 73,000 Mainers signed petitions to put this on the ballot. Over 80% of our signatures were collected by volunteers. It's almost unheard of. And there's some great stories about how that happened. But it was Republicans and Democrats, Independents, Greens, and Libertarians who feel like our political process just isn't working the way it should, and we need to change the way we elect our leaders. Next slide. So, one of the things that folks say is, is this a partisan issue? Is this just a recent phenomenon? But really the impetus for this, and you look at the history of ranked choice voting, in 9 of the last 11 elections for Maine's governor, the candidate who won with less than a majority. In 5 of those races, almost half. The candidate who won got less than 40% of the vote. So over 60% of voters were voting for someone else. It doesn't mean one of these people wouldn't have still won the election, but they would have had a mandate to govern. You would have never had 61% bumper stickers, or they're the 38% governor press release. Those things that are real distractions from the issues. So next slide. Some opponents will tell you this reform is not used anywhere. Not true. About a dozen municipalities across the United States use ranked choice voting, some with populations comparable to the size of Maine. 5 states currently use ranked choice voting to enfranchise overseas military and civilian voters. Those states have actual runoff elections, and if they didn't use ranked ballots for those voters, they wouldn't be able to participate because there's a 4-week turnaround in the election. Next slide. So opponents will also argue that ranked choice voting is unconstitutional because our founders and framers never intended for a ballot where you'd rank candidates and have a multi-round system. Well, that's not true. Courts in 4 states, every time ranked choice voting has been challenged in court, it has been upheld as fully constitutional. It upholds one person, one vote, and it ensures the candidate with the most votes win. We call that a plurality. So cities including Portland and 5 Republican-run states have been using it legally for years. And in fact, the constitutional law school professors at the University of Maine Law School have looked at it too, and they say it's fully constitutional. Peter Peikoff, the longtime dean, Dimitri Bond, the constitutional scholar, have looked at it as well. Next slide. So let's just take a look at the experience of ranked choice voting in American cities that have it. So 98% of voters report no problem using ranked choice ballots. That's pretty comparable to the way we vote now. 90% of voters report that ranked choice ballots are easy to use. 40% of voters report that 40% of voters and candidates report less negative campaign. I'll talk about that phenomenon in a minute and why that is one of the outcomes of ranked choice voting. 10% voter satisfaction with elections. In fact, cities that have what we call first past the post, which is the fancy way of saying the way we vote now in Maine, a majority of voters aren't happy with that system. But cities that have ranked choice voting, they're very satisfied with their system. Next slide. The Portland experience. So Michael Brennan, Ethan Strimling, and David Marshall all ran for mayor in 2011 in Portland. And they talked about the different experience. When they knocked on doors in the past in campaigns, they'd see a lawn sign for their opponent, they'd skip that door and go to the next one. But you can't do that with ranked choice voting. To get to that majority, to build that majority coalition, you have to knock on the door of a voter who may like your opponent best and say, if I can't be your first choice, can I be your second choice? Knowing that if they run a trash and burn campaign, if they put negative mailers out, that voter may say, boy, I don't like that candidate now. I'm not going to make them my second choice. So it can actually backfire. Negative campaign can backfire in ranked choice voting. Next slide. So just comparing runoffs with actual runoff elections with ranked choice voting, Governor LePage said, oh, we should just do actual runoff elections. I appreciate his admission that there's a problem with the way we vote now. Ranked choice voting and actual runoff elections both restore majority rule, but that's where the similarities in. Only ranked choice voting eliminates vote splitting. Only ranked choice voting encourages higher voter participation. Only ranked choice voting enfranchises men and women who are serving their country overseas in the military to fully participate in our elections. Ranked choice voting imposes no additional costs for cities and towns. The implementation cost is about $500,000 for the state. Heather Siraki will use Representative Siraki will use a much larger figure that's based on 2014 estimates that are no longer the case. And exacerbating money in politics. So ranked choice voting doesn't do that. But when you have 4 more weeks of elections with actual runoffs, you attract millions of dollars from out of state into our state to spend on negative TV ads. Next slide. So just comparing actual runoff elections on this side of the screen with the ranked choice voting, you get the same result. It's one election and one ballot with the same result. So in an actual runoff election, you vote in November, you go to those polls and pick your favorite candidate. 4 weeks later, you come back and pick between the remaining 2 candidates. Well, if you like purple the best, you're still with purple. If you like orange the best, you're still with purple. If you like yellow, you either don't come back to the polls or you come back and choose between the remaining 2. So, there we go. That's ranked choice voting.
Appreciate it. And now Representative Heather Siraki from Scarborough.
I have no bias, but I'm just trying to make the PowerPoint work.
I don't have a PowerPoint.
Thank you all for having us here. I was trying to get on one of the local radio programs a few months ago on this issue, and I was told that this issue was a snoozer. And so my challenge today is to keep you all awake as the last person to present today. And I think I can do it. On November 8th, you all get to do my job. You get to be legislator for a day. There are 5 ballot questions. Many voters think that we in the legislature have read the fine print. We have not. Ballot questions don't work that way. They go straight to you. So I talked to Senator Saviello about this bill. He didn't know where to find the fine print. If a sitting senator does not know where to find the fine print, how does the average voter know where to find the fine print? We get criticized. Did you read the bill before you voted on it? Oh, we have to pass the bill first before we find out what's in it, right? That's how it works. Then we can fix it later. So I have some concerns about all 5 of the ballot questions and the fine print in all 5 of the ballot questions. So let's look at this one. To begin with, there's no way to stop a ballot question from appearing on the ballot once the signatures are certified. There's no way. Even blatantly unconstitutional questions will be on the ballot. So I made the motion to try to refer this question to a committee to at least have a public hearing. Can't the public just weigh in on this? Can't they have that opportunity? But we couldn't get the votes for that. So this question will go straight to the ballot. So I was a little upset about that, and I thought, well, let's ask our Attorney General, Janet Mills, for a legal opinion. Can she just look at this? Some information for the voters upon which for them to cast their ballot and make a decision on this. They need information. And I'm happy to say that Janet Mills did comply with that. In March, she provided a 6-page legal opinion. And I would like to read paragraph 3, first sentence. We have received comments from some legislators and others urging our office not to address the constitutionality of LD 1557, that is this bill, before the initiative is presented to the voters. I want you to think about that. Legislators, people who make law that affects every person in this state, were urging our Attorney General not to provide information to the voters before they vote. Well, she could do it after we vote. But don't give that information before we vote. What? Her conclusion was that this bill violates the Maine Constitution in 3 ways. I have provided copies for you all out on the table, and I urge that everyone here read this 6-page legal opinion. Then you can confer with the other legal scholars, apparently, that think this is okay, and see what you think. You're the voter. You're the legislator on these bills. Make your decision. There's a recent article that was printed, and there's a description of how ranked choice voting works, and I think Kyle Bailey did a really great job explaining basically how it works. And I just would like to read that for you. This is Sandy Mizell, I think a professor. I've never had the opportunity to meet him. Under a ranked choice voting system, voters rank candidates as their first choice, second choice, and so on. If no candidate receives a majority of first choice rankings, the last place candidate is eliminated, and the voters who rank the candidate as their first choice have their ballots instantly tabulated for their second choices. The process is repeated until one candidate reaches a majority and wins. So basically, in a multiple candidate race, the ballots of the loser get pulled, they get tabulated, they get to vote again. The other ballots are not pulled. So some people get to vote more than once, while others only get to vote once. That is the ballots of the loser determine the winner. You okay with that? In a real runoff, the top two vote getters have new ballots printed and they duke it out, the top two. This way is very different from that. That is not the same. A runoff is not the same as an instant runoff. Then let's tackle whether we really get a majority with this. In one election in San Francisco, 18,503 voters cast ballots. After 19 recounts, the winner received 4,321 votes. Now, how could that be? You can do the math. With 18,000 voters, be 9,000 plus 1 to determine the winner. That would be a majority. So how could the winner be determined with only 4,321 votes? Because thousands of ballots are exhausted and thrown out. And that number is deducted from the total amount of ballots cast. They redefine the majority with ranked choice voting. It's not a true majority, it's a majority of the leftover ballots. It's not a majority of the ballots cast. And that is why, when considering all of this, I believe that Burlington, Vermont, Aspen, Colorado, Cary, North Carolina, Pierce County, Washington, North Carolina, the judicial races, Telluride, Colorado, all have rejected ranked choice voting, as well as Fort Collins, Colorado, Glendale, Arizona, Duluth, Minnesota, and the United Kingdom. Have either repealed or rejected this proposal. I attended an event where I received this document a few months ago, showing that these are Republicans for ranked choice voting, GOP for RCV. So I made some phone calls to the individuals on this document. One individual has not called me back or returned my emails, text messages, or phone calls. But the other three did. And guess what? They changed their minds on this. If you've already made up your mind on this issue, I hope you will also change your minds. Once you see the facts, I think you will agree with me that ranked choice voting is not all that it's purported to be. It does not support a true majority. It's expensive. It will cost additional money in software, the Secretary of State's office to tabulate, and will require armed escorts to bring those ballots to Augusta to do the instant runoff. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think all of our speakers deserve a round of applause. I thought that was fantastic. I think this fulfilled exactly what we were hoping for. According to my watch, we have 8 minutes until 5 o'clock. And we had talked to the panelists about allowing questions, and what we had said was, we'll see how much time is left at the end. But here's what I'm asking, is if you have questions, whoever you're directing them to, please try to keep your answers brief. You know, I know that the temptation is there to say, can you rebut what that person said and fill up that 8 minutes? But I guess my hope is, and I need your cooperation for this, is let's try to get as many questions in as we can before 5 o'clock. So please try to keep your questions brief, and please try to keep your answers brief if you can. So are there questions? Yes, Ron.
Is it true that all those communities are getting no additional funding, and why?
Great question, so thank you for the opportunity. A couple of things I'd say. First of all, the numbers that Ben pulled, you can look on our website, are referring to a budget situation that happened last year, and it's about 55% at that time. Every year, those numbers change. So every year, the Department of Ed produces new spreadsheets. So this initiative doesn't take effect till 2018. We don't know today what communities are going to get in 2018, because the school funding formula, while that's pretty static, the difference of student populations in those communities will determine how much state aid they get. Now, again, the PICUS study, which anyone can Google, look up on Bangor Daily News, said it's the most equitable funding formula in the country. It actually, like I heard him say Bristol. Now, Bristol is a community that if they have the minimum mill rate, the minimum property tax increase, that's enough, given their property tax, to fund the Chevet model of public education, right? Greenville is the same way. Greenville has lakefront property. So when you look at the PICUS report and you look at those property values, now people in those communities may decide to pay above that. What's also important to remember is when people pass the 55%, what they also said was they want the state to pay 100% of the special ed costs. 100%. Can anyone guess what the state is currently paying? I didn't even cover this in the presentation. 30%. So if the state were to use some of these resources to get back to paying more of those special ed costs, that would change the estimates in those figures. There's nothing prohibiting that from happening.
Hey, just to respond, it's starter in 2018. If you run it, we've had 2 economists run this. It's actually worse when you go out to 2018 in terms of towns are getting little or nothing. In terms of, and it is based on. Okay, we can disagree. We can disagree on that, but zip codes matter. You have an ad out that says every child shouldn't matter what zip code.
Yes.
And guess what? It matters where you live. If you live in Greenville, 0. If you live in Cape Elizabeth, 1.5 million. If you live in Portland, 12 million. The rich get richer, the poor get 0.
Other
That's
questions?
a fact. It's off their website. I didn't make it up.
Yes.
David, can you address the 18 states that currently have the universal background check?
Yeah.
What was the question?
I wanted him to address the 18 states that were brought up that currently have the universal background check system.
18 states that have.
The question 3 folks that are going to be supporting this initiative are going to continue to throw out those 18 states, like somehow if Maine passed this law that we would reduce violence. If you understand what those 18 states do, they don't have any kind of, there's actually only 2, Oregon and Washington, that have anything similar to what's being proposed here in Maine. They have been in existence for only a couple of years and really have no statistics. The rest of the states have very limited background checks. Some have universal, around 8. A number of the others have background checks only for handguns. So to throw all those numbers out there and sound like we're going to reduce all this violence and compare it to those other 18 states is not fair, and it's not true. Washington and Oregon, there's some conflict on whether law enforcement is even enforcing it and whether people are doing it. So let's compare apples to apples in the future.
Bobby?
Yeah, the facts are quite clear. The 18 states that have background checks, whether they're background checks for handguns or transfers for all firearms, have reduced violence when it comes to certain things. Reduced gun trafficking, reduced suicides, and believe it or not, Maine has a high rate of suicide by gun, but Maine has a significant high rate of people who are prohibited trying to purchase firearms. I talked about the 6,000 people that tried to purchase firearms and were prohibited. A preponderance of them are domestic violence perpetrators. The governor had a press conference about it. He wants domestic violence perpetrators to wear ankle bracelets. You'd think he'd agree that they shouldn't have firearms as well. When it comes to this issue, the evidence is clear. Background checks work, and they don't violate anybody's Second Amendment right. If you're not a felon, if you're not somebody that slaps women around, if you're not having been adjudicated profoundly mentally ill, you've got no problem getting a firearm. Like I said, that saying, good guys with guns can stop bad guys with guns. But let's take steps to keep the guns away from the bad guys to begin with.
Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
The person who spoke for ranked choice, was that you? Could you talk about what the Senator, the representative said about the numbers being reduced on the recount?
So some people, with a ranked choice election, some people choose not to rank candidates. You may go into the polling place and say, I only like this one candidate, to hell with the others. You absolutely have that right to do that with ranked choice voting. What you're saying is you don't want to participate in that instant runoff. Your candidate lost regardless, and you don't want to participate in ranking the candidates and electing the candidate more broadly. It's just like if we had actual runoffs, and you said, I'm not going to go vote because I don't care who wins at this point. It's exactly the same as actual runoff elections. It's actually no different at all. It's exactly the same process, but it's way more cost efficient. And you only have to go to the polls once, and you don't have 4 more weeks of negative campaign.
Representative?
Again, I would say it's not exactly the same as instant runoff is very different from ranked choice. The instant runoff, is different than a regular traditional runoff. The runoff is you print new ballots and you have a new election, and the top 2 vote getters are the only 2 names that you're selecting from. With the instant runoff, you could have multiple candidates. You could have 5 or 6 candidates, and it's not the top 2 vote getters that are being determined. The ballots of the loser are pulled and tabulated and added to whoever's left. So it works quite differently than a traditional runoff election.
Thank you. I got 1 minute left. Representative Cooper.
Thank you. David, if I understood you correctly, most of your objections to the referendum on universal background checks had to do with the exemptions and the complications that might arise in trying to enforce deviations from the exemption parameters. So does that mean you would favor a referendum that included no exemptions?
Thank you for the question. Our objections go way beyond that. Making a person a criminal for borrowing a firearm from a friend who's not prohibited, making them a criminal, going to jail, $2,000 fine, and then making them a felony for the second offense. We object very strenuously to that. Crime should be restricted for real criminals, not for people who unwittingly step 1 foot over a 300-foot buffer zone and become a criminal, and step back on the other side and all of a sudden they're legal. That's ridiculous. One point that all of the folks in this room should remember: across this country, crime rates are going down. That can somehow be linked to background checks if you want to use it conveniently to argue for them. But the crime rates have been going down for a long time, and there's a lot of good reasons behind that, and it's a combination of things, but it's more complicated than background checks. I would say to you that part of the reason that gun violence is going down is because more and more people are learning how to responsibly handle firearms. And that's because the sportsmen and the people I represent who train the kids, who spend their volunteer hours out there for nothing, training people how to safely use firearms. And the sportsmen out there that pay the Pittman-Robertson Act money that pays for all those classes to teach proper firearm safety.
Bobby, final word?
Well, I'm going to say a couple final words. I'm not going to filibuster like some people I used to work for. But first of all, it's interesting, your question is this. I'm pretty sure when Sam raffles off a gun, even if it's a friend of David's that wins the gun, they do a background check. So to be able to divine who is a good person, who isn't, we all like to think we can do that, but background checks are the way to do it, and it's constitutional. I'll say this, I'm a sportsman, I pay those fees, I go through the background checks, I don't have a problem with it. My family built guns at Remington Arms, they still do. I carried an M14 and a Navy sidearm in defense of this nation. I'm a gun enthusiast. So to portray that somehow there's a monopoly on guns and the use of guns is just unfair. I hunt, I trap, I have all kinds of guns, as I said. The simple fact of the matter, there can be all this smoke screen that can be thrown. This is simple. Background checks work. The proof is in. All these things that opponents claim will happen have not happened in the 18 states that have them. It's that simple. We can look at the facts. And if you're a law-abiding Mainer and a responsible gun owner, how can you ignore the fact that there's a dramatic reduction in the numbers of women killed by their intimate partners? We just had a knucklehead in Lincoln County shoot his ex-girlfriend in the arm, pop off a couple cats at the state troopers, and then he ran off and shot himself in the head. We don't have to worry about him anymore. But people like that should be able to purchase a firearm in the open market? Come Come on, give me a break. I mean, it's simple. Let's keep guns out of the bad guys' hands. Let's make sure only good guys, like David and me, have guns. Thank you.
Thanks, Bobby, and thank you all.